Okay,
Right.
welcome to Microcollege. This week on the
Thank you.
yeah, welcome. This week our guest is Dawn Jackman Murphy, who is a person, one of my heroes, one of the people who is a leader at the movement level in the folk school world. Dawn is a fellow with the Fielding Graduate University's Marie Fielder Center for Democracy, Leadership, and Education, and is currently in the final stages of her Ph.D. journey. Dawn's area of focus combines her work as the facilitator of the Folk School Alliance and her study of transformational learning for social justice. The Folk School Alliance began in 2013 and includes over 90 North American folk schools in the United States and Canada. This group began meeting monthly through an online platform in 2018 and continues today, engaging in multiple collaborations supporting and promoting folk schooling in North America. Um, and I have to say, here in Viroqua, we love the Folk School Alliance so much that we are members twice. So Driftless Folk School and Thoreau College are also will be listed on the website of the Folk School Alliance. And Dawn and I met at a gathering a few years back in Minneapolis of folk schools, largely from the Midwest and beyond, and really opened my eyes to this really burgeoning movement. Really is growing and is doing wonderful work. So thank you for joining us to talk about it, Dawn.
Well, thank you for all the props there about what I've been doing and also the movement. I am very passionate about the folk schools and what it could mean for communities around North America that are implementing folk education and folk schooling principles. So, yeah.
We'll get into that. So before though, as a listener to the podcast, you know that we always like to begin with grounding our conversations in people's biographies. So
Mm.
if you could think back to the moment when you were embarking on life as an adult, when you were 18, 19, 20 years old, where were you? What were you doing? And what was shaping your life in that period of time?
Well, I think at that point in my life, well, I'm from the Midwest. I'm from the north central part of Ohio, and I'm a first generation college student. So my parents, I had a stay at home mom, and my father had a new and used car business, and a family of 8 children. So, and I'm number 7. Um, and we had I have one older sibling that went to college, and then my number 7 and number 8 are also college graduates. So I think at that point, I knew that I wanted to pursue higher education. Most of my siblings did not. Um, and I also knew I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. And so I picked the thing that I was most familiar with, and that was teaching. Um, and um, and through that sort of education process, I decided that I didn't really like public education. um, and through my teaching practicum and observations in classrooms, I didn't see um, a context for flourishing, like true flourishing and passion. And so I started to look at alternative sort of education, alternative cultural experiences, and that led me to working with the Navajo Nation and the Dene people in the Southwest, and a school that really integrated the cultural influences of the Dene culture, and elders and community, and all the dancing and the drumming and ceremony. And I had the distinct pleasure of being in that environment and really seeing youth flourish. And so that kind of is and that's kind of what in my household too. My mother was a quilter and a crafter, and sang every day, although it was debatable on whether anyone really wanted to listen to her singing. um, but she did it, and she did it with spirit, and joy, and that's what I didn't see in the public school classroom, and was looking for it in other places. Um, and so, another aspect of my upbringing, and this is earlier than sort of 18, is that my mother, particularly, was sort of a silent rebel and a silent influencer within our neighborhood. And being in Ohio in the early 70s, in a new neighborhood and a new development, and new houses were being built. And so one of the things that happened in the neighborhood was that all the kids would watch the house being built, and it was a gang of children, because they were mostly young families, and a lot of my siblings as well. That the house would be built, a moving day would come in, and the new family would show up, and all the kids would line up on the sidewalk or at the curb to watch the family roll in. And of course, our objective was to get into the house and to see what it was and to meet the new people and that sort of thing. And one particular time, and this was around kindergarten for me, so quite young, but it was a very memorable experience. The car rolled up, the family got out, and it was an African American family, the first African American family, the first family of color in the neighborhood. And the feeling was very different. The kids went back to their houses. I just remember being like, what's going on? Don't we want to? No, we don't want to do that. And then over a couple weeks, there was another entity in the neighborhood that put a petition together to try to get the family removed or to force them out. And my mother was very strong in that was wrong. And I remember walking around with her, and she often wouldn't hold our hand, but she would put her fingers down so we could hold her fingers with my little hand. And the family that was working to get the African American family out of our neighborhood, the mom came out and started talking to my mom. And I only remember the fact that my mother started to sing, and sing very loudly and almost shouting. And it's the song, You've Got to Be Taught. You've got to be taught to hate and fear. You've got to be taught from year to year to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. You've got to be taught before it's too late, before you are 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all those that your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. And you know, that song connected to anti-oppression and resistance in that way, is something that was, an intimate part of my experience growing up. And it is something that I find resonating in the principles of folk schooling and folk ed. And so that's why I am passionate about what I do and what the folk schools are doing in community, and bringing community together across difference, are attempting to. So
beautiful.
That's my story.
Thank you. Yeah, I think we've explored a few different facets of the idea of folk school on this podcast, but I think, and it's very diverse, right? And I think that person doing what you are doing, kind of like what we're also working on with the idea of microcollege, you're always like, what is this thing? What it is? They actually sometimes go by different names, but they share similar inspirations. And it's clear that one thing that's connected with folk schools is singing, actually, all the way back to Denmark and then Highlander School and other places. Singing is one of those things that build a people, right? And so that's a powerful story. So maybe you could share, where you first heard of this idea of folk school. How do you connect with this? And then, and for the purposes, and what is your definition of that term that you are working with?
Sure. Well, I first heard of it. It's shared that my mom was a crafter, and I am a crafter, and I in my pursuit of working in education, I landed in community college. And part of my community college experience, I also integrated national service. So we had an AmeriCorps program that I looked at in that integrated with teacher preparation. And so a lot of young people coming to do national service and to integrate that into their education as teachers, and lots of them wanted to learn how to knit, and I knew how to knit. And so we put together a group called Knitting Things Done. And if you're familiar with AmeriCorps, they often say we get things done, we're getting things done. So we're knitting things done. Um, a couple people, and one in particular from that group of AmeriCorps members, I've kept in touch with, and she's from South Carolina. And she was learning how to spin her own yarn. And she said, we should learn how to spin, and we should go to John C. Campbell Folk School. And I said, what's a folk school? Oh, little did she know how much that would change the direction of what I do and where I am, and that sort of thing. And little did I know, really. So I learned about folk schooling through John C. Campbell and through craft. And that was the time that I think the search engine du jour was Alta Vista. So we can go back that far. And when I Googled, the two things that came up were John C. Campbell. It's one of the oldest folk schools in the United States, and so Highlander. And I told the song about song. I told the story about song and how important that is to me and that story, and the work that Zilphia Horton did at Highlander in her community organizing through music, and that connection, deep connection with identity and culture to anti-oppression and resilience of a community, really just resonated with me. And so I started looking, every once in a while, Google came along, and then I started Googling, and I saw all these new schools starting to pop up, and decided that's what I wanted to study for a PhD. And then started my PhD journey, and then started contacting folk schools. So how do I define what a folk school is? And this is often I ask the question, what is a folk school? And I am asked this question all the time. And I've decided that the definition that I provide is that it is a group of characteristics or principles that organizations live out in different ways. And therefore it is what if you use a mathematical term, is a fuzzy set. The other thing about a fuzzy set is that it is really heavily influenced by time and context. So a folk school in 1860 or a folk high school in 1860 in Denmark probably will have the same sorts of principles, but it will look very different than what a folk school looks like in 2023 that is starting in Cumberland, Tennessee, or Fairbanks, Alaska, or in Nova Scotia, Canada, because you're looking at what your community needs at the time that you're putting this together, and that really impacts what is done and how you do it. In this current movement, that started probably in the late 90s with founding of folk schools, they're really centered around cultural and cultural practices and craft. It's a need. It's kind of emerging all over North America, this need, and in some cases across the world. So there's something that we need. that that's coming up, and we're trying to meet it.
Hmm. Beautiful. Yeah. So that can you talk about that need in particular? Because the North American folk schools have this distinctive connection to craft, to folk arts. Also, I think here at the Driftless Folk School, we do quite a bit with homesteading skills, things that are cooking and foraging and kind of food skills and gardening skills, things like that. But again, embodied, hands-on kind of experiences with natural materials. What is it about our time that this is our need that's emergent? Why is this sort of stuff important to us?
Well, I mean, when I've asked that question, that technology has divided us from ourselves and our place and our community in many ways. It's allowed connection in other ways, but like immediate connection through our bodies is something that is lacking. Um, and and that connection with our immediate community is lacking. So there's social isolation, and sometimes that is um, um, exacerbated by digital isolation, and also connection to place. A tangible tacit understanding of place and self is something that you don't necessarily get through the society that we have right now. So and what you've described, our so the members in the Folk Education Association of America and the Folk School Alliance are farm schools. They're organizing entities. They're craft and community, and some of them do all of that. They do language instruction. They do stream health. It's very connected to place. And one of Fairbanks Folk School and did a little mini documentary as part of a study that we did. And Carrie Hamos talks about folk schools are different in every place, and it's one of the things that makes them unique is that it is what is in the location where the folk school is. They do a lot of, I mean, they center their work on the arboreal forest, whereas others center there's a Cortez folk school in Florida, and it's very different what they do, and it's connected to what the community, how you live in the place you live. So
Yeah, that's certainly, it's a wonderful thing to meet and to hear about these other folk schools, and you learn something about their place, right? And also, I mean, I can reflect on the folks I've been interviewing on the podcast, and also the people who attended that gathering in a few years back in Minneapolis. There are some real remarkable social entrepreneurs, people who are who are stepping out to make a big difference in their community and to try something out that is fuzzy, right? It's a trying to enact something distinctive in the world. Can you talk about who initiates these projects? Are there patterns that you've found, and what where and who these 90 different folk school initiatives there are who are they?
Well, I mean, generally a lot of them start as like two or three friends that like to do a practice, and and they want to share that practice. I think the one of the main founders at North House Folk School is a boat builder, and he likes to build boats. He likes to do that with friends. Um, and it started there with a group of people that were doing that and wanting to share it. And I'll go back to Fairbanks Folk School. They like to be in the arboreal forest, and they want to bring their families, and they want to bring their families, and then it started to be something other people wanted. The Land Alliance Folk School in Iowa, and there she I'm can't remember the lady's name at this point, but she had the whole let's have pizza together, and then it turned into a gigantic thing. The community just coming together to make pizza together, and then and it's a couple friends that get together that enjoy a practice, that want to share it, um, and that start to organize around that. The Shenandoah Valley Folk School, which is still under development, is the person that's sort of putting that together, or sort of leading that charge with a group of folks, moved into the area and really wanted to get to know about where she lived, and wanted to make connection, and started to look for models for how she could do that in a very structured way. And so she met a bunch of people, and this was during COVID, so joined online communities, did a survey. What would you want to see in our community? Out of that survey, got people that were really interested in the folk school idea, and now they are launching their folk school, but I think it was 3 women. um, and I'll have to tell you, I think it is a female-led movement. There are men involved, but the majority of the new founders of schools are women, and white folk. Um, and that I think that's something to be examined too. That that this is a need within white communities, um, that that they're trying to meet this in some way, or nurture their communities and connection. Um, and that's not to say that it wouldn't blossom in other ethnic communities and or racial communities, but it just so happens that this is really a white Northern European movement. And that might have something to do with connection with the Scandinavian roots of it. But only about a quarter of the new folk schools have any awareness of the Scandinavian folk school movement.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, that's an interesting kind of dynamic. I think if go back, if you could talk a bit about that history. I think that you mentioned the John C. Campbell Folk School and the Highlander Folk School, which are both have been around since the early 20th century. They both have pretty direct influence from Denmark, right, in their origins.
Yep.
They both landed in more or less the same region in the U.S., which is southern Appalachia in Tennessee and North Carolina. But they manifested this folk school idea in quite different ways, right? Could you talk about that?
Sure. So the Folk Education Association of America is sort of categorized different movement, folk education movements. So there was the Danish American folk school movement that was, late 1800s, early 1900s. And then there's, what we have sort of labeled as the American adaptation. And that is individuals from from North America going to Denmark or Scandinavia. And in the case of Highlander and also John C. Campbell, their founders went to Denmark and were looking for a model of education to adapt to their context. And the Danish folk high school model is what they chose to utilize. So they brought it back to their communities and adapted it to the needs within their community. For John C. Campbell, I mean, they were really looking at economic development and resiliency within their community. They saw a lot of their young people leaving because there wasn't economic activity going on, a lot of poverty. And so in its very beginnings, and within the first few months of a year of John C. Campbell forming, they started a farm school, they started a savings and loan, they started you know, a dairy. They started rural uh, agricultural cooperative kind of um, organizing so that young people would stay and not leave the community, and they were building um, no, it's identity now. Remember time and context. Its identity now is at a, as a pretty high level arts and crafts school, in what they do and how they live out their principles, with those roots. It's tangible when you're at John C. Campbell, but it's about building cohesion within the community that's there for a week. Now Highlander, same thing. Miles Wharton and Don West, um, generally the two folks involved that are named as founders, although there was a multi-ethnic, multi-racial group of people that founded Highlander. They went to Denmark as well. In the book The Long Haul, which is Miles Wharton's autobiography, he talks a lot about his experience in Denmark, and he looked at the schools at the time, and the way that they were being implemented, and was like, no, this is not what no, this is not what I want. But he connected to folks that were connected to the early schools, and he said, that's what I'm interested in. And he brought that back to Monteagle, Tennessee, that idea combined with African American influences, and the influences of the area. And at the time, labor, the there were no unions, and there was lots of poverty, and there was lots of oppression going on, and they started to really center their work on community organizing and examining issues of oppression and finding ways to build resiliency in a lot of different ways. And what Highlander, how they articulate what they do now, is movement accompaniment. um, and that's, again, it's, when you go to Highlander, it's tangible that what is done is creating a community and connection with those that are there during the study that's there. And when I was there, it was a group of people that were looking at gun violence. There was a group of Black Lives Matter folk, and there I was. I want to get folk schools together, you know, and I felt, how do I fit into this um, scenario? But all of the folks there were like, yes, what you do is also very important, and important to what we do, and we are all connected in this, making our society and lives better. I probably went off into another sort of category there, but that's kind of what I know of how Highlander and John C. Campbell evolved and were adapted from the Danish folk high school model.
Yeah, no, don't apologize for that, telling that history. I think it's history that I think people should know. And in general, North American and Danish folk high schools, the story of Highlander, those are stories that I tell whenever I get a chance as well. So because it's important. And I think one of the things that I appreciate about folk schools, the folk school movement, is it does, this is an idea that challenges our habit of putting things into too small boxes, right? I'd never heard of a folk school when I got involved with a group that ended up starting the Driftless Folk School here in 2006. But I think it was a group of people who were a lot like the ones you described. They were people who had crafts. They were blacksmiths and timber framers, and people who were interested in growing and cooking food and medicines and things like that. Wanted to share those skills. But they also were, beyond that, and perhaps deeper than that, interested in building community, right? And so there's all of those two things going on, right? Of like, there's some very, we hope that people go home and keep knitting and using these skills. I teach chicken butchering, and I do think that people go and use that skill. I hear back from them. So they come to learn something, not just for the aesthetic of it usually. But even in the context of a class like that, people are building community. You see people like exchanging their contact information, and that important social capital is being built and exchanged in that context. And it's go ahead.
Go ahead. But I was going to say on that note, I did, in probably 2017, 2018, I did a analysis of the new folk school mission statements, because a lot of people at the time and continue name a lot of arts and crafts schools. In why isn't this school in your list? Well, one, I'm like, well, they haven't contacted me and say they're interested. And two, if you look at the mission statements of folk schools as a group, those entities that have folk school in their name, they say we build community through X.
Right.
So the thing that occurs most often in a mission statement for a North American folk school is that building community, strengthening community, bringing community together through craft, through outdoor adventure, through etc. And I think the folk schools that I've attended, that is a tangible emphasis when you walk into a classroom or a context where folk education is happening. It is about connecting with those people in that room and hopefully continuing that connection outside. So sorry, interrupting.
Beautifully said. Yes, yeah, that's context that you are in a unique position to bring, right? Having looked at all those mission statements. So maybe that's a great transition to talking about the Folk School Alliance and the Folk Education Association of America. Can you talk about the work that you do, and what can you do as, I just think, a meta organizer with all of these like local organizers?
Well, one of the things that because I was really interested in all these little schools popping up and wanting to connect with them, and what I found when I started to connect with them and call and talk to them and that sort of thing is, and actually at Arbutus Folk School here in Olympia, Washington, the founder there, I said, well, do you know there are other folk schools in North America? No. She was like, I thought I invented it. She knew of John C. Campbell, and had looked at it a little bit, but and there was this, and I hear it again and again with what I do with the Folk School Alliance. There's loneliness in trying to create this thing that people A, don't know what it is, and B, think it's a lot of different things, and you don't want to necessarily define it too tightly, because so what I started to see when I was talking to folks is that they needed a place to connect in a community of practice. So, and the concept of community of practice really comes out of like apprenticeship, and whether you're at a wood shop or a furniture production and that sort of thing. But it is this group of folks that are engaged in a similar practice, and I wanted to bring that kind of that opportunity to these folks that are developing folk schools, so that there are things that are unique about founding a folk school, whether it's how do you get insurance when the insurance agent says, oh, you're a school, you need to do all fingerprinting, because if you're going to be working with kids, and like, oh, wait a minute, we're not it's 16 and over or whatnot, and oh, so you're a trade school? No, not exactly. you know, so how do I launch classes, and what does it mean to be a folk school as opposed to an arts and crafts school or environmental education? I mean, there are so many things that I think that folk school founders need to talk about, and 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 not feel lonely, and
Mhm.
knowing that there are other people doing this kind of work. And so that's the space that I've tried to provide through the Folk School Alliance and this monthly meeting that we have, and that started when everyone was just learning how to use virtual meeting spaces. And what do we? It's evolving. My doctoral study is coming to an end, with hopefully the dissertation being completed soon, and some of the deep listening that I've been doing with folk school is coming out in that. But my my idea is that the research that I did and the understandings that I have, I want to help the folk school movement articulate what they do and how they do it. We just recently sent out rap cards that kind of
Beautiful,
try to
by the way.
articulate, thank you,
Yeah.
that try to articulate that through, one, a lot of people, when they hear the word folk, they think art immediately. And the root for a folk school is that folk means people. And so we're about bringing people together and creating community among those people. We're also about uh, craft and connection to self in the current movement of folk schooling. We're about place and history and storytelling and song and music and all that that entails. And so I hope that I've been able to help create sort of a frame that folks can engage with without it being too constricting. Um, because that's the fuzzy set, right?
Right.
That's um and also the idea that what I mean, the folk school founders are in dialogue with themselves and their communities, and they are acting to resolve and to solve issues within their community, so that connection to community and action within community is essential there. Um, so when people ask what folk schools do, I hope that the new folk schools can, if they identify with those things that I've come up with out of the data, that's what the data is saying, is happening. So that they can draw on that to share their story. I also provide, and through the folk school alliance, technical assistance. My doctoral degree is not in folk schooling, it is in organizational systems and human development. So coming up with, what are some success indicators for the direction that your organization is developing. We have also implemented several studies, which is based on an approach called participatory action research. That's where our little mini documentaries come out of. We
Yeah.
did lots of projects, community-based organizing and mutual aid projects during COVID shutdown. So strength comes when you have a community to live in. And earlier I said digital isolation was an issue within community, but here I am using digital tools to bring this folk school community of practice together. And the more that we know each other, the more we're doing together to make our communities better. So at
Yeah.
least that's, I hope, what we're doing.
I think you are. It's I think just the work that you're doing to help this, it's a true emergent phenomenon, right? Each of these folk schools is emergent out of their local community. And there you are, you're helping to give a frame and an awareness, a self-awareness to an emergent property at another level, right? At the sort of continental scale level, which is pretty remarkable. I hope that your research ends up in a book or something like that, because it's a, just from a systems kind of, and like just an emergent property kind of perspective, it's pretty interesting. And the other thing that's interesting to me about it is is paralleling, what happened in Scandinavia, right? That there was a field emerged there in a way that transformed those societies. So I think this is, again, something that certainly part of the mission of this podcast is to spread this kind of story, because it's hopeful. People despair about changing things, and things actually have changed and can change, and new things can emerge in the world.
Yes. That yes, I am there with you. And in fact, I think it's interesting because I'm headed to Denmark to talk with some folks interested in North American folk schooling, because they often are they have a different frame when they think of folk high school. And often what I have to do over there and with those communities is say, okay, think about what it was like in late 1800s that these folks are organizing through volunteer. There's no systematic financial support for this. It's based on tuition a lot of times, which has all kinds of barriers there, although lots of the folk schools are looking at alternatives like barter-based compensation and that sort of thing. But it's that emergence without a very developed structure to help there. And I actually, a lot of folks say, oh, it would be nice to have all of that. But one of the things that developed in Denmark is the fact that they, and was demanded by those that developed it earlier, is that there is no government involvement in what the curriculum is.
Yeah.
And that is so important. So important. It's just, I mean, and a lot of folks might think, oh, then that's wildness, right? But no, it's people meeting their needs in their time, in their place, in their and having that happen in a way that is well supported.
Yeah, that's how it's able to emerge from its place, the needs of its place. And the one of the taglines that the folk school alliance uses is leading from the roots, right?
Yep.
That's a beautiful image, right? And I think that that's emergence, right? And that has to come from below, right? From the roots.
Yeah. And I have to say that sort of tagline, I did a anonymous survey with the folk schools, and I think it was somebody in the upper Midwest, from what I can tell. But that didn't come from me. That it came from somebody out there in the folk school community, and I really resonated with that. And so did our board. And also, there's a Miles Horton quote that kind of mixes with that, and that you can't cut off a tree and plant it somewhere and expect it to grow. You have to have the roots. You have to know the roots. So I hear that again and again. And also another famous quote by one of the principals of a folk high school in Denmark back in the day in the 1800s. You stick your finger in the soil and smell where you are, and if the skills of the teacher meet the needs of the people, you have a folk school, or in that context, a folk high school. Yeah. So it is really about listening deeply to where you are and the community that you're in. And therefore, whatever that is, whether you call yourself a folk school or not, meeting that need. So
yeah. So on that topic, I know that one of your interests and passions, and it comes up in the stories that you've told with us here, is on on questions of social justice and the United States of 2023 is different in some significant ways from Denmark of the 1800s. I think there's probably more like regional diversity in Scandinavia in the 1800s than people really realize, but people were generally of the same racial and ethnic and religious background. They were building a people from a little bit more tightly related kind of materials in a way culturally. But the word folk implies the building of a people, a self-consciousness of a community of people in some way. So I'm wondering about what you've learned or what ideas you have about the role of folk schools in building a sense of peoplehood in our country or in our times.
Well, I mean, one of the things about this is, like I said before, it is largely and maybe exclusively a white-led movement. In this time, in this place, um, what it means to build community from the skin you're in. Um, and with all of the challenges and the structures that are around us now, and this our society in North America is built on white privilege and white it is a fraught endeavor and to try to adapt in this environment and to be inclusive of all the people that are in your community, when you want to create a sense of belonging, not necessarily welcome. You want them to feel as though they belong. And that means that our folk schools that are white led, it's a high hurdle for them to delve deeply into how they are creating structures that either create belonging with the people that are in their community or not. And so what I've identified is a big challenge. And I don't think that's I'm that, at the risk of saying something that's very obvious as some sort of finding. But what I feel and what the role of the Folk Education Association and the Alliance can be is to provide support in that. We have a new project that's called the Folk Education Network. And that's because the term folk school is to some extent very limiting. There are a lot of entities out there doing folk education that are more diverse in a lot of different ways, that would identify perhaps with folk education and not folk schooling. And so we are looking at that, the issue of inclusion and belonging and what it means to create community in partnership with other organizations doing folk education that aren't calling themselves folk schools. And that one of those is the African American Craft Initiative through the Smithsonian, also the community singing movement. I think they've been doing really important work and looking at how they create belonging within their context and the gatherings that they have. Hard work, but essential and important if we really want to live out the idea of creating community cohesion with a broad spectrum of community. Like when you asked who's doing this, it's a group of friends normally, and so therefore that sort of connection with who comes to the folk school is largely created through those friend networks. And in our context and time now, those friend networks are not very diverse. And it takes an intentional examination of that and an intentional uh, eye to developing systems that are more inclusive. And I think that this is an important time with all these new folk schools starting to really look at who's the community when you say community. Um, and who, when you bring your group together to organize this, who's missing from that community. And so I'm hoping that the Folk School Alliance, in partnership with these other organizations, will learn together about that and will co-lead a process where we create that cohesion across these organizations. One really significant learning that I've had that I was not aware of, that the African American Craft Initiative has shared, is that the word folk is a barrier to many African American craftspeople and artists, because even if an African American craftsperson or artist has been trained professionally and has an MFA and all the qualification in fine art, was and is often relegated to folk art. And so there is an immediate sort of rejection of that word because it is viewed as sort of a
like amateur.
Denouncement or an amateur, right? Yeah. And so that's a barrier that we're going to have to think about and address and work on. And I'm sure that there will, this new partnership and this new project will be countless ways we learn about how we do things and how we can change what we do to better work together and create cohesion between folk educators.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that's you can see all the challenges that come with that important work. Yeah, I guess another dimension of diversification that's important to me and to our project here and is age diversification, actually. And I'm wondering, if you, from your vantage point, are you seeing what are other folk schools doing to integrate younger people, young adults, and children into their work? I think a lot of the kind of classic kind of folk school craft groups are often older people who have the time and the resources to do that, and I think it's interesting that the movement in Denmark starts with the movement for young adult education.
Well, I mean, one of the things, North American folk schools are different. A lot of them have integrated programming for families. And even, I mean, one of the things that happened during COVID and during isolation and sort of the limitations of interacting with people that weren't in your household is that some were offering family gatherings, which I think are continuing offering that kind of programming. It's a lot of intergenerational work. And the idea of having some sort of institutionalized support to really grasp and connect with younger people, I think is because most of the society funds public education in a way, that probably doesn't meet the need. And then anything alternative, it has to be for very specific needs. So it's a challenge to live, practically and survive as an organization if you don't have, credentialing and certification, and you're not a trade school, and you're not preparing anybody for a job necessarily. As you know, you probably know it better than I. But there's a lot of family programming. And I mentioned before, connecting with homeschooling entities and groups, to provide, experiences for those groups. It's not a big part of what the folk school movement is doing currently, but something that they're all looking at how to provide that, because there's a need. It's definitely a need, but how to sustain it.
Yep.
So
Yeah.
there's a
And
problem.
the observation here, working with Microcollege, the students, college age students often have, in a sense, the ability to devote more time, right? They could take a semester or they could take a month. We've got a group of, we'll have 14 students here for the coming month. People between 18 to, all the way to 29 years old. And older people often don't have that ability to do that until they're right, much older, retired or something like that. But they also generally don't have access to the same financial resources. So it becomes
Mm-hmm.
because you need to house people, and there's a different logistical kind of set of challenges with that kind of age group. But
Yeah.
yeah, so thank you for your thoughts on that. Yeah, I want to encourage everyone to check out the website of the Folk School Alliance. It's those mini documentaries that Dawn mentioned are great. They're great visuals of the people and the places and the activities that are going on all over North America. Really, really inspiring and hopeful kind of set of stories. And Dawn, thank you so much for your work in putting that together and providing this context for these stories to be shared.
It's been a pleasure. As I always say in the folk school community of practice, I'm just always delighted to see that people come.
Yeah.
and then and then I leave just absolutely energized, with I mean, that it's a group of folks that are really working for change in their communities, a much needed change. And it's a privilege and a pleasure to be part of that group, and that I am a part of it. So,
Right. Thank you so much for your taking some time with us today.
yeah, and thank you.